The Vatican did not only collect prayers for centuries, it collected taxes. It even turned the forgiveness of sins into money. Every golden dome was not a symbol of a donation, but of a sale. And those sales created the greatest religious fortune in history. How did it happen? Take your tea or your coffee, because this is the story of how faith turned into money. Faith or wealth. Today, the richest religious institution in the world is the Vatican. Its paintings, basilicas, and works of art could rival the museums of entire nations. Its bank quietly manages billions, and its influence reaches from Wall Street to the poorest villages on earth. But this wealth did not fall from the sky. It was built step by step over centuries, and every step carried both faith and power. This story is not about theology or about God. It is about where economics and power meet history. Because the wealth of the Vatican shows how a movement of faith became a financial empire. Everything began in the year 313, when the Roman Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. That decision legalized Christianity and ended centuries of persecution. In one night, a small underground faith became a state-backed religion, and with that change, the gates of wealth opened. Nobles donated land, emperors sent treasures. Constantine himself financed the first St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The message was clear. Wealth was not the enemy of holiness, it was its ally. And from that moment on, the Church learned a lesson every empire already knew. Money is power, and power always wants more. Selling faith in the Middle Ages. By the Middle Ages, the Church was no longer just a place of worship. It had become a massive machine for generating income. The system that made this possible was called the tithe. Everyone was required to give 10% of their earnings to the Church. It was presented as a duty of faith, but in truth it was a tax wrapped in holiness. The wheat from the fields, the grapes from the vineyards, the share from the village mill all flowed first to the priest, then to the bishop, and finally to Rome. Imagine being a poor farmer in those days. Your family is hungry, the land is dry, winter is coming. Yet you still have to hand over a tenth of your harvest. If you refuse, they say you risk not only angering your priest, but also God himself. This system was so strong that over the centuries, the Church became the largest landowner in Europe. By the year 1000, nearly one-third of Western Europe's land belonged to it. Cathedrals, monasteries, farms, forests, vineyards, all were real sources of wealth and production. Long before banks existed, the Church had already discovered how to create real profit. But history always repeats the same scene. Once the door to wealth opens, it never closes easily. Soon even land and taxes were not enough. And that was when the Church found an even more profitable solution. Indulgences. The forgiveness of sins, sold for a price. The price of sin. The trade in indulgences. The Church's new invention was simple, but built on brilliant marketing. It was called the indulgence. The idea was clear. If you made a donation, your punishment for sins would be reduced. Sometimes not just yours, but even the souls of your dead relatives could be saved. In short, salvation was now for sale. And this system was incredibly profitable. Gold and silver flowed into Rome like a river. The Church used this money not only to build cathedrals, but also to fund wars. It was no longer just a spiritual institution. It had become a political and financial powerhouse. The Crusades, which began in 1096, were the perfect example. Officially, they were holy wars fought for God, but behind the scenes, everything ran on money. Armies needed weapons, ships, supplies, soldiers, all of which required funding. The Church imposed new taxes and told the people, if you cannot fight, make a donation. Your soul will still be saved. Those who could not hold a sword joined the crusade with their wallets instead. The conquered cities, the treasures, the captured lands, all were claimed in the name of God, but the true winner was always the papacy. The Vatican was no longer just the guardian of souls. It now controlled money and kings. The irony was hard to ignore. Priests still preached poverty and humility, while the Church had become Europe's largest landowner and tax collector. Ordinary people were accused of greed. even as the Vatican's vaults overflowed with gold. Once again, history repeated itself. While morality was preached to the masses, wealth was quietly accumulated behind the curtain. The Golden Age, Dark Pages, the Renaissance and luxury. Over time, the Vatican was no longer just the center of faith. It became the heart of money and politics. During the Renaissance, popes lived like kings. The church was less a house of God and more the richest palace in Europe. But this grandeur came with a price. The old St. Peter's Basilica, built in Constantine's time, was falling apart. The popes wanted to replace it with a cathedral so magnificent that all of Christendom would stand in awe. Yet the cost of such a project was beyond anything the church could afford. So they returned to their old method, selling indulgences. Preachers were sent across Europe. Salvation certificates were no longer a matter of faith, but a marketing campaign. One of the most famous was the Dominican friar Johann Tetzel. His slogan became legendary. As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. People were terrified of eternal fire. They gave their last coins, believing they were buying mercy. Salvation had been reduced to a handful of silver, but not all that money went into the church walls. Much of it funded the lavish lives of popes. Pope Alexander VI of the Borgia family filled the papal palace with scandal and pleasure. Pope Leo, the 10th of the Medici family, spent fortunes on art and feasts while Rome's poor starved. From the pulpits, greed was condemned as a deadly sin, but in Rome, wealth had become a symbol of status. Officially, the church still banned usury, lending money with interest. Yet behind the scenes, popes partnered with powerful banking families like the Lombards and the Medicis. Together they grew their fortunes. By then, the Vatican was not just managing souls, it was managing the debts of kings. Rome had quietly become the financial center of Europe. But every story of wealth eventually reaches its breaking point, and this one was about to explode. Luther and the bursting bubble, the beginning of Reformation. By 1517, a monk in Germany took a step that would change the course of history. His name was Martin Luther. One morning he nailed a document called the 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg. It was not just a critique, it was an act of rebellion. Luther's message was clear. Salvation cannot be sold. Faith cannot be bought. The church has turned God's forgiveness into a business. To him, Rome's wealth was built on the desperation of ordinary people. They no longer feared God, they feared the church. And someone finally had to say, enough. Luther's protests spread across Europe like wildfire. One spark had ignited the forest. This moment became known in history as the Reformation. People began to question Rome's authority. The indulgence system, once the Vatican's golden goose, had turned into a symbol of corruption. And the greatest irony of all, the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica, the crown jewel of the church, was funded by that very corruption. The grandest monument of faith had become the reason faith itself was divided. Wealth had given Rome glory, but it also planted seeds of anger. And history always follows one rule. No empire can silence the fury of its people forever. By the 1600s, the Vatican was still powerful, but no longer untouchable. The Reformation had shattered its divine image. Europe was divided, and the Vatican had to share its power. Yet some things never changed. On the surface, there was still faith. But beneath it, money kept flowing. Like every great power, the Vatican adapted. It had lost half of Europe, but it never stopped turning faith into balance sheets. The methods changed, but the formula remained the same. The fall and the return, the resurrection of money. For centuries, the Vatican's wealth had come from land, tithes, and indulgences. But by the 19th century, that system began to collapse. In 1870, Italy was unified, and the Papal States, the territories ruled directly by the Church, were seized by the new nation. In a single stroke, the Pope lost his lands, his rents, his armies, and his income. He was now only a spiritual leader. Many believed it was the end of the Vatican's power, but history always reminds us of one truth. Institutions built on money never die easily. The Church waited, quietly and patiently, for its chance to return. That chance came in 1929, under the rule of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Mussolini wanted the Pope's blessing because no leader could win the hearts of Italians without it, so he signed one of the most important deals of the 20th century, the Lateran Treaty. The agreement gave the Vatican independence as a sovereign state, but more importantly, it granted enormous financial compensation for its lost lands, 750 million lire in cash and 1 billion lire in government bonds. In today's value, billions of dollars. Almost overnight, the bankrupt Vatican was rich again. Europe's oldest institution had just received a bailout. With this new fortune, the Church created a new financial tool, the Institute for Religious Works, better known as the Vatican Bank. Officially, it managed funds for religious orders and charities. In reality, it grew into a powerful financial entity, protected by secrecy and free from oversight. During the Cold War, Vatican money was used to support anti-communist movements. But in the 1980s, the shadows grew darker. The Banco Ambrosiano scandal erupted. Billions of dollars disappeared. And one morning in London, a body was found hanging under Blackfriars Bridge. His name was Roberto Calvi, God's banker. His pockets were filled with bricks. The cause of death, murder. From that moment, the Vatican Bank became linked to whispers of mafia ties, intelligence networks, and money laundering. And here lies the deepest irony of all. An institution that preached poverty and humility had mastered the dark arts of finance better than most corporations. The wealth once built through land and indulgences had now been reborn through treaties and banks. The Vatican had learned the ultimate rule of power. In a world ruled by money, secrecy is the strongest shield, the holy image, hidden truth, the mask of wealth. Today, no one truly knows how rich the Vatican is. The system is built in layers so complex that reaching the full truth is nearly impossible. It holds priceless works of art. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, Raphael's frescoes, Bernini's sculptures. They can never be sold, but their value is measured in billions. Across the world, the Vatican owns land, real estate, and investments, yet its official reports always show modest budgets. But anyone who knows history understands one thing. Appearances deceive, and sometimes power hides best inside the illusion of humility. The Vatican's wealth was not created in a day, nor by a miracle. It was planned, gathered, and guarded with precision, just like every empire that came before it. It grew through taxes, strengthened through land, deepened through indulgences, restored through treaties, and modernized through banks. It gained power by selling salvation, by negotiating with kings, and by mastering the flow of money. This story is not about faith. It is about how power really works, and that is why it still matters today. Because the Vatican is not alone. Every system that asks for your trust while enriching itself plays the same game. Governments print money while telling you your currency is safe. Corporations preach values while exploiting their workers. Banks promise security while gambling with your savings. The formula never changes. Faith on the surface, money underneath. So when you look at the golden halls of the Vatican, do not see only religion. See humanity's oldest lesson. Wealth that grows in the shadows always wears the mask of virtue. And when someone asks you to trust the system, ask yourself this: who truly profits from your belief? History never repeats word for word, but if you fail to understand it, it will crush you just the same. Final words: faith or money. This story was never just about religion. It was always about power and how it works behind the curtain. Because the Vatican's wealth is not only written in sacred texts, it is written in how money shapes the human soul, and the Vatican is far from alone. Throughout history, every system has asked for the people's faith while quietly enriching itself in the background. A government says your money is safe, while printing more of it. A corporation says we stand by our values while underpaying its workers. A bank says your deposits are secure, while risking them for profit. They all follow the same formula. Faith on the surface, money underneath. So when you look at the Vatican's golden halls, do not see only faith. See the oldest financial truth in history. Wealth that gathers in the shadows always wears the mask of virtue. And the next time someone asks you to trust a system, ask yourself this: who really benefits from that trust? History does not repeat itself word for word, but if you fail to understand it, it will make you live the same mistakes again. If this story gave you a new perspective, do not forget to like the video and subscribe, because the answers are already written in history. I am just here to show you where to look.